Hello and welcome to the College of Business and Economics Distinguished Speaker Series entitled Leaders, Ways, and Wisdom. The speaker series is hosted by the Dean's Advisory Council, and I'm the president of the Dean's Advisory Council this year. And I'd like to take this opportunity to tell you a little bit about what the Dean's Advisory Council, or DAC, is, and how the DAC can serve you. The Dean's Advisory Council consists of representatives from business-related student organizations here on campus. And the primary intent of the DAC is to provide a channel of communication between students and the dean so that we may provide input for, discuss the issues of, and help facilitate any changes in the College of Business and Economics experience. The DAC can be your launching pad for any ideas, questions, comments, or concerns you may have about college curriculum, school policy, or anything else College of Business and Economics related. Without further ado, I'd like to bring up Dean Clements, who will introduce today's keynote speaker. Please welcome Dean Clements.
Thank you. Am I on? Thank you. It's a great pleasure to have you all here today and to see so many smiling faces in the audience for our inaugural Leaders, Ways, and Wisdom Kobe lecture series. I know that I personally was hoping when we kicked off this lecture series that the individual we could get to start it for us would be Mike O'Halloran, so we are most fortunate today to have Mr. O'Halloran with us. Michael D. O'Halloran is executive chairman and founder of Aon Benfield, the largest reinsurance brokerage and capital advisory firm in the world. Aon Benfield has operations in more than 50 countries and employs in excess of 4,000 professionals. He also serves as senior executive vice president of Aon Corporation, the leading global provider of risk management, insurance, and reinsurance brokerage and human capital consulting, with approximately $11.7 billion in revenue and operating in more than 120 countries and 500 offices. He serves on the boards of World Business Chicago and CareFusion Corporation and is a member of the Economics Club of Chicago, the Commercial Club of Chicago, and the World Presidents Organization. Mr. O'Halloran also serves as chairman of the board of Providence St. Mel School and on the boards of Dublin City University in Ireland and the Ireland Funds. He is the recipient of numerous civic awards, including the Ellis Island Award, the American Ireland Person of the Year Award, and the American Ireland Chamber of Commerce Man of the Year Award. So you see that he has some affinity for Ireland. Mr. O'Halloran is a graduate of the University of Wisconsin-Whitewater with a degree in accounting and finance. He received the UWW 1997 Distinguished Alumnus Award, the Kobe Hall of Fame Award, and served as UWW's May 2002 commencement speaker. I personally heard Mr. O'Halloran speak at the May 2002 commencement, and I have to say it was a very moving event for me, and it really altered my perspective of what it means to sacrifice so much of your life to your career, and what it means to those who are part of your life as well. He is a very busy man, but he is also a wonderful guy. I've had a great pleasure showing him around today. He takes great interest in UW-Whitewater and our College of Business and Economics, and it's my great pleasure to present to you Mr. Michael O'Halloran. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Dean, and thank you, Chancellor, for a wonderful day on the campus today. I also like to thank Quinn for that great introduction, and also to Kate Loftus, who has been hounding me for months to come to the table. Not really, but she's been terrific. And it's a great welcome, and I spent the day here, as mentioned, and boy, you are awfully lucky because 40 years ago, when I was sitting in your chairs, this school was a great school, but it's now one of the greatest schools and institutions in America, and maybe even the world. Today I'm really going to talk about a journey. And that journey started 40 years ago for me, the day I left University of Wisconsin-Whitewater and embarked upon my career. And the purpose of what I want to talk about today is really threefold. One is so that you can get an awareness of what it takes to build a global company. more importantly, I want you to get excited about the globe we live in and the events that have taken place that have really changed the face of our world, and the things that will continue to challenge and provide tremendous opportunity in the future. I can also tell you that I know that I'm between Fat Jacks on a Thursday night, so I'm going to try to be succinct and very organized in my thought process, but let's let the journey begin. Now, as you know, that to understand where you're going, you have to know where you've been. I've always believed that experience is a fundamental piece of learning that you have to take with you and learn from both your good and your bad. And I can tell you that as I sit here today, I know that many of my fraternity brothers would not be even surprised that I survived, much less I'm talking to you today. But survive I have, and as Dean Clement talked about, I believe that it's been one of the greatest rides I can ever think about. And I think so, as you look to where we've all been and where we're all going, I think you too have that opportunity. Now, I want you to know this is not me, okay? Because UW guys do not wear white pantsuits. And if I see any of you in there, it must be Halloween. But it is something that kind of was the 70s. And it was about, this guy happens to be John Travolta, but he's staying alive. That was his favorite song, and he's thriving. And the one thing that I want to embark upon you is the fact that life is not a marathon. This has happened to be in a marathon dance, but I'm sorry, it's not a sprint, it's a marathon. And as you look at where you're going and how you're going to get there, you have to understand those very important fundamentals. So let me give you a view of what my world looked like, and some of the other people in the audience might have been there. But this is a really interesting slide as far as I'm concerned. When I was thinking about addressing you today, I was thinking about what did the world look like in the 1970s? Was it a global world? Was it a regional world? What did it look like? Well, I've got a lot of boxes up there. So it implies that the world was not connected. In fact, it was very much isolationism. And you didn't even see as an example that Latin America and North America actually was the Americas, because there was no such word back then. There's no such word as the Americas. So when you think about the evolution of being global and the evolution of doing things in a different way from just being a regional environment, you have to understand that there were all types of barriers out there. I'm going to talk a lot about those barriers today. But these barriers were real. And so what had to happen and what will play out as we go through each one of these decades are the things that necessitated what I call the global demand curve, the global supply and demand curve. And so you see areas off to the right there that look like a yellow box, and they were. Nobody even knew who China was. Nobody knew who China was. I explained earlier today that when I arrived on the campus, I thought I had gone on an international trip from Chicago to Whitewater. It really was that type of isolated world that we lived in. So let's take a look at the reasons why. You know, I say a picture's worth a million words. Well, this is a trillion words. And let's look at the size of the economies back in the 70s. Look at the United States. $1 trillion size of the economy. 1 trillion. I didn't even know what a trillion was back then. But I can tell you that if you added up 2 through 10, it would not equal the size of the United States in total. That then says to you, why was that? Why were we in such an isolated world that the U.S. was such a huge economic power? It also was a big military power. So does the fact that you're a democracy open borders? I don't think so. Does the fact that you have economic power? It could have, but we are still very much trading within ourselves. The U.S. did lead the world in exports and imports. We were very much a consumer nation. There was all types of barriers, though, that were out there. Why weren't we going and forming alliances in the UK as companies? Why weren't we doing business in other parts of the world? Well, again, there were military borders that were up there. There certainly were religious borders. There was all types, like there is today, civil unrest. And so there was all these inhibitors to becoming a global economy. I'm not going to go through every one of these because it's a very busy slide, but I want to talk about a couple of them because they are very much the reason why we're gravitating as we go through the 70s and round into the 80s to more of a global world. Now, Saturday Night Fever was up on the screen a little while ago, and Star Wars and Jaws and Grease, and guess what? Virtually the entire world film industry was in Hollywood. Can you believe that? There weren't studios in London, there weren't studios, there were minor studios, but it was run by the God Almighty United States of America. When you look at point number 2, a very, very telltale sign about the world of unrest. Think about the massacre at the Summer Olympics back in 1972. I realize many of you weren't even born, but that was a real sea change in terms of the world that we lived in and the world of risk that was about to embark. And I live in the world of risk, that's the business I'm in. And so you think about somebody can come into the Olympic Village and massacre all these people. Safety was also a concern. And people were fearful of going overseas. And I told Christine today that I'm going to eliminate all your fear about going overseas today. What about this People's Republic of China? Who are they? They were just first recognized back in 1972 by the UN. Think about that. Think of how long ago, but how short ago that was, 40 years ago. 40 years ago. When you think about the oil crisis, this is the first time we're seeing, in my lifetime, first time I'm seeing the word oil as not just oil, but a weapon around the world, a commodity that was so valuable, and yet we were consuming it at a rate that was so unreal, and therefore it became our biggest weakness as well as possibly our biggest strength. I think that, you know, when you think about Richard Nixon, not many good thoughts come to mind. I know not in my mind, but he was the first president that took the risk to go to China and open up the conversations with China. And as we emerge into the 2000s, you'll see how important that risk was. And the last point on this page is something that I think is a testimony of the fact that Al Gore did not invent the internet. Because the first email transmission was in 1971. And Al Gore, I know, was not involved with the internet at that time. But it was an interesting thing when you think about, as you sit there today, and think of the world that we live in. So, what is this? This is our good guy Pac-Man. That was a great, great game that we all played in the 80s. And of course, that with the fact that we had the Rubik's Cube there, proved that if you could play a good game of Pac-Man and you could solve the Rubik's Cube, you could be a war hawk. And so, as we go into the 80s, we start seeing some really important things, some really important trends. What are they? First of all, transportation. To this day, my personal belief, I'm sure others share things differently, especially if you're a technology company, but I think to this day, it's the most important thing that's ever happened to creating a global world. You fly over barriers. You get to cities. You get to continents. You go faster and quicker and with more people than ever before. But if it hadn't been for the airline, if it hadn't been for our ability to get on a plane and go someplace, whether it was from Chicago to New York, much less Chicago to London, we wouldn't be able to have the interrelationships that we need to have to be a global economy, to live in a global world. So to me, that's very important. I don't want to diminish the technology world. I don't want to say that it hasn't had a credible influence, but back in the 80s, it was just evolving. It was just coming on board. Al Gore was just taking more and more credit for it. But the reality was it wasn't anywhere near what it was and could be. And I'll talk about an experience I had with some people to tell you how far along it's come. I, sitting in your seats, took a course in computer technology, or computer information systems, COBOL and Fortran. Sounded like, you know, what the hell is that? It's the most complex names you ever heard. And by the way, I was not a very good student at it. And I don't want you, Dean, to go back and check my records, but I did pass. But I think it had a C and a minus below it. I mentioned political will. The world was evolving in terms of us willing to take on more and more risk. And as you'll see, one of the key things to be able to be a global leader and live in a global world is that you have to have vision. You have to be able to have vision to know where you're going, but more importantly, as importantly I should say, you have to know how to execute. That's the same thing in life, by the way, in everything you do. So you've got to have both those things going for you, and by the way, you have to take risk with it. So now we're rounding into the 1980s, and this is kind of interesting. You remember the thing we saw in the 70s? Well, now we're starting to see spheres. We're no longer just seeing boxes. There's still boxes out there, but all of a sudden we're evolving in terms of becoming more connected. And for the first time, you see the Americas actually appearing as a connected, an interconnected global enterprise. NAFTA came into being in the 80s. NAFTA was extremely important. Our trading neighbors to the north, Canada, our trading neighbors to the south, Mexico. Still two of the most important trading partners to the United States in the world. We're starting to see the movement of companies going and physically locating in Mexico, physically in Canada. Canada being one of the most natural resource, probably one of the best natural resource countries in the world in terms of what it has available. And we are its biggest consumer. So now even in our world, we certainly could speak to the Canadians. They speak English. And I'll tell you a little story about that when we talk about the UK. But the reality was that now we're going to deal with the Mexican economy and the Spanish language. You would say, well, God, that's easy. But how many people spoke Spanish back then? Our schools were not preparing us, the future leaders of business, because we weren't required back then to take a language in high school. Mine, of course, was a very functional language called Latin. You guys, do you want to talk Latin with me? I mean, that was what I took for school. So it may have helped my math a little better, but it certainly did help me converse. You also see South America, okay? So I've still got a box there because I have reservations about what we're trading there. I've got Mexico in there because I think Mexico was a very good partner with us. If you look at Russia, Russia's in total chaos. And as you'll see on the next slide, you'll see what happens to it. And where's China? China who? Nobody even talks about China back then. I don't think anybody in the entire time from the time I left school until the mid-80s even talked about China. And look where we are today. Think about the word every time we talk about the global world. We talk about where we see the future, see that vision. Why was it that people were unwilling to go to where they needed to go to? Part of it was political risk. There was a lot of chaos in the world. There was a lot of uncertainty. There was risk in terms of making financial conversions, financial currency. If you took risks there, you could lose it all. You could walk away because of the regulatory environment. We didn't know who could run those businesses. Can you believe the fact that most American companies who were supposed to lead this global charge and had these trillions of dollars, they couldn't trust anybody. They only trusted to put expats over there. Expats like me, okay, running an operation in France? I don't think so. I told you I don't even speak, any other language but Latin. How could I speak French? So that was a real critical issue. Who could we trust? Who could we put into our operations even if we wanted to be there? And did it fit strategically? Why did it fit? So as we round into the 80s, we see this next slide. So what's happened? In one decade, there's been a shift in the economies of the world. We now see the emergence of Japan and Germany. From the last PowerPoint I showed you in the 70s of this same table, Japan and Germany's economies have grown by 4 times. 4 times. Our economy has grown by double. And so why is that happening? One is that the world is starting to break down the barriers. People are starting to get through this trust factor. Most importantly, And this is a very, very critical part of being an individual, much less being a businessman. If you don't understand the culture of the people that you're going to be working with, wherever it may be. For instance, when I was here in 1970, in the 70s, I knew the culture of a Bear fan and a Packer fan. I won't tell you who I was aligned with because I want to get out of here today. But the reality was, we talked differently. We thought differently. We acted differently. We had a soda fountain, you had a bubbler. We had pop, you had soda. You know, so think about those little differences between Illinois and Wisconsin and multiply it in spades in terms of trying to do business in different parts of the world. Language. Language, a very important barrier, a very important opportunity. What else was happening? Well, as you see the emergence here, by the way, you don't see China on this chart, do you? No China. You see the fact that we're starting to trade with some of our European allies. We're starting to emerge, if you will, as a trusting partner in the UK. We're doing more and more business together. We're doing more business together with Germany. What happened to the United States in the 80s and the 90s? We became less of a manufacturing economy, and we became more of a consumer economy of those products. In fact, we became a more financial services world than any place on earth, but we were losing our quest to become more and more focused on the manufacturing world. What two countries did that? Japan and Germany. So we were forced, even though we may have not liked it, I liked it, but we were kind of forced to go to Japan and say, we're going to buy your products. We're going to go to Japan because they have high quality products. People were starting to say, I'm not going to buy a US car, I'm going to buy a foreign car. Foreign cars, my father would roll over in his grave if I ever bought a car from somebody like that. But the reality was that was all breaking down. The other thing was technology was starting to raise its head in a material way. And also cheap labor markets were emerging. And that started to have a snowball effect on building a global business, building a global economy. What were some of the key events back then? I mentioned the manufacturing move. People were starting to move their businesses out of the United States. A couple reasons. One was because of unions, quite candidly. Cost of labor was going through the roof. Inflation was spiraling. Companies had to say to themselves, if I could do it cheaper, maybe not as good a quality, maybe as good a quality, but if I do it cheaper, I can then turn it around to the consumer and charge them more and make more money. That sounds like a pretty good solution, isn't it? So now you have this kind of movement to say, it's not too bad to go overseas. Let's start buying companies over there. Let's start building businesses over there. Let's start looking at things in a different way. Another important factor, I call it a fear factor. A lot of people would not invest in Europe because they were afraid that communism was going to take over the entire European world. 1989, that changed dramatically. Communism went the other way. The Berlin Wall falls. All of a sudden, trust and confidence comes forward. We start again seeing item number 3, the launch of IBM PC, and yes, Apple. Apple appears. The first Apple comes on the horizon. And, you know, who knew what a mouse was? But it was the mouse that roared, the mouse that changed our lives, the mouse that broke down barriers. Barriers that get in the way of everybody in terms of doing business. And, you know, I think this last one's important. We had Prozac, which helped us to deal with more pressure and have more fun. Now emerges the next, comes this company called Aon. So I wanted to kind of show you what happened in terms of our development and what were the things that helped us create a global company. First and foremost, when we started the company, we were very much a regional organization. We had US-based insurance brokerage. We had US-based insurance company operations. We were USA all the way. You know, we weren't chanting ole, ole. We were USA. And so, but there was something going on. Our clients were starting to say to us, you know what? I just bought a plant in Germany. I need insurance. I have employees in the UK. I need to have benefits. I have a growing manufacturing supply chain issue because I just opened an operation in Thailand. So what did we have to do? We either stayed a regional company or we started growing. The late 1980s, that's when it really started. And I happened to have sat side by side with our founder of the company, Pat Ryan, and myself as the COO of the organization to start building what was going to be a global empire. And I think if you look at, in 1987, the percentage of revenues that were coming from outside the United States was somewhere in the area of around, I'd say 10 to 15%. That was it, okay? So you're going to see a pretty dramatic slide in a little bit that's going to show how fast and quick that changed. Now this next picture, I think, again, is pretty interesting. We're now seeing the influence of satellites. We're seeing the ability that, yeah, you know what, if we open operations in Japan and in Brazil and in da-da-da-da-da, we can actually talk to them. We can actually check their books almost at the same time, so the trust factor comes back in. We can actually have confidence that we can actually go in there, and maybe even we'll put a Frenchman in charge of France, because you know what, we can check on them. Believe me, that's how people thought. And so as we look at that, we also then looked at the incredible power of the military. And why do I say that? The military has changed our lives many times over many decades. It's influenced the world in so many ways, and we're seeing it again in today's world. But what happened was the tide of the military shifted so dramatically after communism that our fear factor as America was going away. We were in charge. We had it all. We had the might of the military. No China. Japan, no military. Germany, no military. France, they all walked away. So, you know, the reality is that we were the only military might in the world. So our fear factors were going away, our barriers were going away. And of course, on the bottom, you see the fact of the internet and its explosion. So now we're in the 90s. I only see a couple boxes there. I see a box under Africa, and that, you'll see, will disappear. Global business is now a buzzword. People are all into global business. And I'll remind you, don't globalize that which is not global, because you'll get in a lot of trouble. But the reality is that it's now a global world, and we're starting to navigate across borders. We're starting to build businesses around each other. We're starting to trade imports and exports. The shifting of the sands is becoming quite unbelievable. And we're all about to kind of have an explosion. We're having an explosion in the business world. And you're all very bright young people, and you're here because you want to learn about business. Just remember two things: supply and demand, because that controls everything in the world: pricing, capital, everything you do is supply and demand. Okay, that's premise number one. Number two, it's about people. It's all about people. If you've got the right people, you've got the right products, you have the ability to transform across borders, you can do it wherever you want it as quickly as you can, you've got the internet working with you, you got it going. So that was the buzz of the 90s. And we were seeing a lot of cultural divides coming down. Now, there was also, you know, the need, obviously, don't forget that about that airplane. It was flying all over. So you could literally, the planes got faster, you could literally get to Europe from Chicago, at least I'll use that as my reference point. What used to be a day and a half was now you were getting there in 8 hours, okay? That's important, because then you could actually go from that trip, you could go over to Germany and visit people there, because that was only an hour and a half. So now all of a sudden transportation, internet, all these things are starting to enable us to become global businesses. But let's not forget, there's still this culture thing. You got to get to know the people. You got to understand who they are, what they're all about. You got to understand that people interpret things differently, even in emails. Even in emails. You send a different email to somebody in France than you send it on the same issue. You'll word it differently, and you'll talk differently, tonality-wise, to people in different parts of the world, because we are not all the same. We are all people, but we all have different ways of interpreting things. So this, again, allows us to start emerging, and if we go to the 1990s next, wow, this is a very powerful slide for me. Look at Japan, Germany, France, and yes, they finally made the board. 1990, China. China's here, guys. Wake up. The power, the sun is rising in the east. A new power is emerging. 1.3 billion, I said billion? Billion people. Amazing. How about Brazil? People talk about Brazil. Brazil, all they do is have a carnival there. Isn't that what they do? Oh, no, they got 180 million people. They want to buy our goods. And everybody's trying to grow. Everybody's trying to find new ways to grow, new growth opportunities. People are starting to expand all across the globe. And so as you look at this, you say to yourself, where did Mexico go? They're off the top 10. Argentina actually was in the top 10, which was kind of unbelievable, but that had to do with inflation more than anything. But the reality is that you're now seeing the power of the U.S. economy having less power relative to, remember the first 70s we showed you, where you added 2 through 10 and it didn't even equal the U.S.? Now you add up 2.5 countries below, 2, 3, and half of 4, and you got the same size as the United States. So the euro is emerging. And if we go to the next visual, you'll see this truly is the dawn of the information age. This is where it really started coming together. European Union formation made a major change. Now, realize that, I was mentioning this to some people earlier today, last Thursday, not at this time, but a little earlier, I was speaking to a group in Madrid. And I went from Madrid, then I went to Dublin. And then I went from Dublin, I went to London to meet a guy from Greece. So in a period of about 3 days, I got to talk about the Spanish economy, the Irish economy, and the Greece economy. Not a pretty picture. Not a pretty picture. We'll talk more about that when we get into the 2000s. But there's a lot of things changing here. Think about the first McDonald's opening up in Moscow. Unbelievable. Why weren't they there 10 years earlier? McDonald's, they're everywhere. Why wouldn't they have been in Moscow? Some could be the fact that maybe culturally people didn't like hamburgers. They proved that wrong. But also, the fact was there was political risk that going there. That fell down. Remember what happened? The Berlin Wall went down. Democracy now is in Russia. It's a different form of democracy, but it's actually there. Companies are taking more risks by actually establishing offices there. They're building plants there. They're looking at putting McDonald's there. Someday maybe there'll be a branch of UWW there. Who knows? Chancellor, I'm not going to hold you to that, but how about number 8? Hong Kong reverts to China after 156 years. The UK, the biggest empire builder in the history of the world, is now offloading all their colonies. This just happened to be one of them. The other one they're very upset about is the Falklands, which they still hold on to. It's a mighty, mighty country that's got more sheep than people, but it's very important. So again, reoccurring themes: political risk, religious wars, oil. We'll come back to oil. And obviously, for not the first time, because we always saw the issues of the Middle East relative to Israel and the rest of the Middle East. But now it's all the countries of the Middle East and all the issues that we as an economy and other economies have to deal with, the weapon of oil. So you say to yourself, well, we've got all those risks, why would I want to do that? Because if you don't take risk in anything you do in life, you don't get opportunities. You don't get rewards. So you got to measure risk-reward ratio to understand what you're going to get. You got to say, okay, I can quantify it. I can look at a balance sheet, I can look at an income statement, and I can say, you know what, that doesn't look that bad. But guess what, against that, you might have the potential for political unrest that could wipe out your entire country in that region. You could have a currency issue occur that could wipe out your entire profits. And if you're a public company and you have that happen, you're going to get killed on your stock value. But it's a risk. You've got to weigh those risks and your opportunities. So now what about this little company called Aon? We're emerging too. And most of the focus I want to talk about here is, from 1987 to 2000, we grew from $2.5 billion to $7.3 billion. We did that with 423 acquisitions. Why do I know that? I was involved in every one of them. 423 acquisitions. But look where our acquisitions are coming from. We had one big one in the United States, but look down the side. Spain, Norway, Netherlands, France, UK, Italy, Germany. This was our year of trying to get everything we possibly can, this decade. And so we're emerging because our clients, remember I said our clients are saying to us, we have insurance needs everywhere. Look at that bottom thing. Thailand needed insurance for their subway system. Who would have ever thought that you could go from Whitewater to Thailand? It's amazing. It's an amazing story. Now you're dealing with everybody in the world, and everybody in the world needs insurance. We love that. That's good for us. Now we're going to go into the new millennium. Again, I want you to keep thinking about why are these things happening? What's happening to make the world more global? I mentioned earlier about the internet. So if you see those two handsome guys up there, Bill Gates and Warren Buffett, I attended a seminar for an organization that I belonged to called YPO, Young Presidents Organization. And this was back in '99, thereabouts. And the three guys on the stage were Warren Buffett, Bill Gates, and Jack Welch, General Electric. Okay, this was unbelievable. This is the most important thing you're ever going to hear for me at the time. And so Bill Gates talks about internet, technology, everything's going to turn that way. Nothing's going to change. Get out of the way. You're going to have to spend all the money and give me all that money, and bricks and mortar don't matter anymore. Consumer goods don't matter. We're going to do everything by the internet. Vastly, of course, applauded by Jack Welch, who was nearing the end of his tenure at GE, but had decided that the only way that he was going to survive was on the internet. And then gets up old, cuddly Warren Buffett. Old Warren, the guy who he's old and he's like an ancient fossil. And he gets up and he says, I know you two guys are the smartest guys in the room. I really do. But I got to tell you, I can't invest in anything that I can't touch or feel. I like Coke. I like Dairy Queen. I like See's candies. I like things that I can see and touch. And I can't see and touch anything you guys are talking about. He says, so I'm not going to discount the fact that some of this is going to be done that way. But just remember one thing. It's about people. It's about using all those other tools, intellectual capital. That's why you're all here. You're all here to gain intellectual capital so you can be valuable to somebody in the world out there who wants you to be their employee. That's why you're there. So here's the old curmudgeon Warren, bringing reality back to everybody. And if you recall, everybody thought that by the beginning of 2000, if you hadn't moved about 98% of your business onto the internet for supplier demands, you were going to go out of business. And I remember, by the way, because I was afraid and my colleagues were afraid of the same thing. We weren't that smart. We couldn't figure it out better than these guys, Bill Gates and Jack Welch, that we better invest a lot of money in this thing. And I remember we invested somewhere in the area of, just in 1999 alone, $250 million. We decided a 10-year plan of $250 million. Boy, were we wrong. We were so wrong. Thank God we stopped it and we slowed it down. But the reality is, even today, how much business is sold over the internet? I don't have the answer, by the way. But I'm going to just put it out there because I know I still go to Walgreens and CVS myself. I don't go to the grocery store, my wife does. But I can tell you, I'm not getting it over the internet. And so the reality is, the internet was just one other very, very important tool, but it wasn't the be-all, end-all. And when people say it's too good to be true, it is, it probably isn't. Now, if you look at, again, I keep alluding to the Chinese flag here, but we're going to see in a second what that all means. So let's go to the next. So, 2000. What's going on now? Well, the boxes almost disappeared. Isn't it amazing? The boxes have almost disappeared. We still have a box around China because it really hasn't emerged. It's still number 10, remember. We still have it under Africa. But every place else, we're pretty much working on all cylinders. We got places everywhere. We're doing business everywhere. We got connectivity. But we also have risk, okay? The risk of regulation. I remember buying a company in Germany, and I remember thinking to myself, well, you know, we typically would, we had an existing company we had bought some years ago. So guess what? We're going to buy this company, and we're going to make 1,000 people redundant. It was part of our thought process in terms of our ideas about being able to get the right price for what we bought for and get the return we wanted out of it. Shame on us, we didn't do our homework. It took us 4 years to get those people up because they have something in Germany called workers' councils. And so the risk of buying businesses in other parts of the world are the fact you better understand the rules. Because if you don't, you can get yourselves into some pretty hot water. I think the other thing that you have to understand there too is language. The worst acquisition that I ever participated in, by the way, we've had a lot of good ones, so I'm showing my own laundry here, but the worst acquisition we ever made in my career at Aon was in the UK. You say, the UK? How could it be in the UK? You both speak English. No, we don't both speak English. They speak a different form of English than we speak. They have a different set of values than we do. Now, we have common values, but they have different values. They have a different culture than we do. We said to them, you know, we're going to give you this money, and when we buy businesses, we're buying people. We don't buy bricks and mortar, we're buying intellectual capital. And they said, fine, we hear what you say. We're going to buy it, yes, yes, and we want you to work for at least 5 years. Sure, we'll do that. We're going to do that. We're going to make that commitment. Because otherwise, if they walk out the door, they can walk out with the business and everything else. Well, they lasted 6 months. They had our money. They decided that they didn't want to work for a big global company. They wanted to be their small little company that they were. It's about a $200 million company. And they walked out the door. Now, what do I say to that? Well, I say that probably we couldn't have anticipated that they would renege on their responsibilities. But the reality is that the interesting thing I want to really say to you today is remember when you go to places globally, the language isn't the same, even if it's in English. It's different. You got to really get underneath and understand it in a different way, even when you're traveling, even when you're just traveling on pleasure. Make sure you know what you're talking about. So now let's look at 2000. Again, here we go. What a change. Spain just went off the map. They're gone. The USA, we're still dominant here, but I would say very vulnerable. Very vulnerable for a couple reasons, but one is we let manufacturing go to the other parts of the world. That's number one. But number two is the fact that we don't have cheap labor. And the third thing is the fact that we are now a diverse economy. We're a global economy. So guess what? We didn't have the controls we once had in that almost $10 trillion worth of GDP, right? So now we got a whole different risk. Now we are truly, this is a slide that really tells you we are now a global world. We are now a global economy interdependent on each other. The word interdependent comes out. Where the heck did that come from? Interdependent. We now have to understand what it is in every place we go and how we're going to move and what we're going to do and who's going to run these businesses and on and on and on and on. Note, number 6, China, almost 2 trillion, all right? They have moved pretty significantly from 3 decades ago. Brazil, emerging. Germany and Japan still dominant, but keep in mind Japan's been in a deflationary spiral for decades now, right? So their engine is not humming. Our engine is kind of purring. Theirs is kind of dormant, if you would, right now. So what happened? Well, you know, 9/11, obviously for all of us, was a very, very challenging time. For us in particular, we lost over 200 people. And so we learn what the world of risk is in a material way. Loss of lives, loss of an incredible, impact on our economy, but the lives obviously were the most important. And we learned what it was to be global. We're vulnerable. We're vulnerable as a nation. We're vulnerable in business. We're vulnerable politically. And yet, if we don't do it, where do we go? You now live, all of you have just inherited a global world that you're going to live in. And by the way, I love it. I think it's the most exciting thing that ever happened to me in my life, was to move from the west side of Chicago to Whitewater, Wisconsin, and decades later, run a global company, have built a global company. So I'm not trying to just talk about the challenging things, because the excitement, the ability to sit there across the desk in Paris and in Warsaw and in Tel Aviv, Japan, and now Beijing. Boy, we've come a long way, and we're going to go a long way further. But we need to get our people, we need to get all of you ready. We need to have you understand the global world in a better way. You need to experience it in a different way. Look what's happened in the global financial crisis. Clearly, we've had our issues. We've had our subprime losses. We've had a lot of things, and yet you look around the world and you'd say, we're doing a lot better. I know it's hard to believe at almost 8% unemployment. We're doing a lot better than everybody else. I just mentioned the 3 areas I was last week. Spain, 25% unemployment, 50% unemployment for their young people. 50. Ireland, 22% unemployment, 50% of their young people cannot get a job. Okay? So when we want to look at comparability, yes, we're doing a lot better. And I do see a brighter picture out there. I see the trend lines because, as you'll see in a little bit, we actually touch almost every company in the world in some way. But we have to get through this. And I'm optimistic we will get through it. And I do think that, we're going to need luck, hard work, and we're going to need a lot of young people and a lot of intellectual capital to do it. So, what's important about this slide? Remember that little company that started in 1987, regional company, doing U.S. business, buying up U.S. regional companies? Well, now we go from $7.3 billion in 2000 to $11.3 billion in 2011, and we'll certainly surpass that this year. Look at the percentage of business that is U.S. We went from 59% in 2000 to 46% in 2011. Amazing. Who would have thought that we would go from 1987 to 2011 and have transformed our entire company to a global company with all the things I've talked about? Exciting, unbelievable. Be able to stand in front of your colleagues, 60,000 strong around the world, and be able to talk about our great company, our great global company. That's something that's very inspiring for me. We also need to understand that, where are we going to best benefit as a company? So we actually decided to move our corporate headquarters from Chicago to London. Why did we do that? We did it. We're not unpatriotic, I assure you. We are very much the opposite. But the U.S. tax code has become so onerous in terms of the worldwide business, that we had to make a change to get a very significant tax return, but also to run a global business. London, when you're operating in all the time zones that we operate around the globe, London is a very advantageous place to operate out of. So talk about a transformation. By the way, I'm still living in Chicago. And we only moved 14 people. 14 people left Chicago. So those are mostly financial people, HR people, et cetera. But at the same token, U.S. lost a company. That's going to happen. That's going to happen everywhere because countries are now competing for companies. They're looking for people to move here, do this, do that, cheap labor, whatever the case may be. But it all gets back to the same thing. What about people? So where do we go from here? Go ahead to the next one. I think that, it's clear as you look at this slide that we have we have a massive sea change. The prediction for 2020 is that China will surpass the United States as the leading economic machine in the world. I think that's a pretty accurate judgment by a lot of people. I would turn to our academics here, but I would think that if you talk to economists, et cetera, that would be true. Is that good or is that bad? I think it's great. Nothing's better than competition. It fosters a whole new way to find different ways to be number one. But being number two isn't bad because guess what? We're going to be able to sell more and more products to 1.3 billion people and India. By the way, India just appeared here. Can you see that? India has not appeared up until 2010 rather. India, billions of people, billion people plus, okay? 2 billion plus people that we can sell products and services if they'll let us. I mentioned earlier to a group of people that I was visiting with today that we got our license in 1995 in China. And I went over to seal the deal. Took us several years to get it done. And we thought that's all well and good and that, we're going to just boom for business in China. But in China, they have some pretty protectionist attitudes, and you're reading about it in the papers all the time. And so what we thought was going to be a boom, it's not a bust, but it's not going to be there as quickly. It's like the internet back in 2000. It's not going to be the end-all, be-all to everything. India has very similar types of restrictions. So we're going to have to, take our time, get to know the people, understand the political risk, understand the financial risk. We're doing different currencies, things go up or down. We even have to worry about a thing called litigation. What's litigation got to do with it? We're the most litigious society in the world. We sue everybody. We sue each other, we sue our families, we just sue. We're 750,000 strong lawyers who help make this economy the great one that it is by suing each other. But the good news is we have exported that to the rest of the world. So what's that mean? The price of products go up because you've got to put that cost of litigation in the cost of your product. So the good news is we may be the cheap labor compared to what's going to happen over there. But you also have to be very careful about all the things that we do talk about in other global business issues. How about foreign corrupt practices? It isn't unusual, even in today's world, that brown paper bags go under a table in different parts of the world. I'm not going to accuse anybody. I'm just telling you it's an issue. And if you see the emergence of issues where people are convicted for doing things with government officials or whatever the case may be, it's growing leaps and bounds. It's a risk of being global, but it's an opportunity as well. The other one that I find pretty interesting here is Russia for the first time. I visited Russia probably about 5-6 years ago. It scared the hell out of me. I mean, it looked like you were over with Al Capone. I mean, there is a lot of fear in that country about corruption and crime. But the reality is that they are getting their act together. They are a power. They are somebody who, we have offices in Moscow and in London, or in St. Petersburg and et cetera. But I have to say that, it's something that you have to watch. You have to be part of, but you don't say no to because, again, it's a major economy that has to be dealt with in an appropriate way. I think that also that, you have to realize that being global means that you have to have respect for each other. You may find somebody saying something in a different way, and you'll say, that doesn't make any sense. But it may make sense to them. So you have to listen. Listening is a very important asset that all of you should take away from your college careers and take it out into the business world. Learn to listen. Learn to listen very hard and fast and understand, because that doesn't mean you can do that. You can do that anywhere. You can do that in Beloit, Wisconsin. You have to listen to what people are saying, because it'll tell you a lot about who you're dealing with, but also it'll tell you about what the opportunities are presented there. Now, this is a snapshot of Aon today. I mentioned it briefly. I said, you know, we're now in 120 countries. I think they actually were 130, but whatever. We're in 120 countries and 500 offices. That's a very demanding schedule. That's a lot of that air travel that we talked about before. But guess what? We can get there. That's a lot of people to talk to and understand. That's a lot of people to understand, to employ 60,000, 62,000 people. But the reality is that, as depicted there, that we actually, as I said earlier, will be more of a company outside the U.S. for the first time this year, or last year, and this year it'll actually go up even further. We project by the year 2020, 60% of our business will come from outside the U.S. And if we hadn't gone there, you can't imagine what would have happened in terms of our growth factor and where we'd be. So it's been an incredible run. I mentioned earlier, what do we touch? This is kind of a fun slide that, did you know that there's a 1 in 2 chance that the mobile phone that you have right now is produced by an Aon client? Aon clients are responsible for designing and manufacturing 70% of the world's 20 best-selling pharmaceutical products. In the UK, over 5 billion pints of milk a year are supplied by companies insured by Aon. In 2009, Aon placed film insurance for 5 of the Oscar winners. Pretty big number. It placed 16 of 26 of the nominated films. We have the largest share of the worldwide space aircraft business market. This is really important. 1 in every 2 bananas in the world is shipped by a company insured through Aon. Don't slip on that one. And 7 of the world's top airlines, there they are again, are Aon clients. So, as we round into a summary, I would say this. Where do we go from here? I've kind of laid the table, the foundation of the economies, of the risk, of the opportunities, of being global, of the great opportunities for all of you. And I think that that's who I want to really focus on here. I want to talk about you. How about your involvement in the global world as you leave UWW? I would say to you that there's a couple things you need to do. Number one is that you should get away from the fear factor of getting on a plane and going someplace else. It's exciting. It's wonderful. It's the greatest thing you could ever imagine. It's the greatest asset I've ever taken away from the business, is to land in another country and learn about these people and understand their passions, understand who their football teams are. They got it wrong, by the way. They call them soccer. They should be soccer teams. They call them football. Talk about a mismatch. But okay, I still do business with them. The reality is that the incredible world out there besides Whitewater, Wisconsin, or from wherever you are, is one that you can't imagine how exciting it's going to be. I talked to several students here today who were telling me where they've been, and you know, it's only a handful, and we need to get all of you there. We need all of you to take that opportunity if you can. You really should, even if it's to go across the border to Canada. They have great beer there, really good beer. I know you got good beer here, but they have really good beer there. Second thing is that you've got to open your minds. You've got to think in a way that, you know, this is not about the US of A. I'm an American, and I'll always be an American, but I am a global citizen. I belong to the global world. And I've always said this from the day we started the company to where we are today. Our headquarters is in any one of those 500 offices on any given day. That's the way we operate. Because if you don't operate that way and you don't have people who you trust and people who you want to really give the power of your organization to, you're not going to succeed. And the only way for you to get over those fear factors is get to know the people, understand the culture. I strongly encourage that you do internships with companies if you can get them. if you can study abroad and some of the programs that I just left my son, he came up to see me in Dublin on the weekend, and he's over in Prague right now. And we were really concerned about what the heck is he picking Prague for? He could have gone to Madrid, he could have gone to Florence, he could have gone to Rome. He picks Prague. Now we found out it's all the beautiful women. But the reality is that, what did he find out? He knew but that we didn't know. I was concerned about the language issue. Do you know in Prague, in their schools, they teach everything in English? I didn't know that. So he's in a class with people from Czech Republic, plus himself and other schools around the United States and Europe, as a matter of fact. And he's learning their culture, he's learning the people, and he's learning the business, and he's learning all those things that you can't just get in a textbook. And if you don't get out and see it, you're not going to learn it. So I really would encourage that. Get involved with different clubs at school. Get involved with, get some really great books on if you're going to go travel. Learn the country before you go there. We're talking about China. People ask me, of all the countries you visit, what's your favorite? And I would say, obviously, being a politician, I'm not Paul Ryan, but being a politician, I would say all of them. But I have to be honest with you, I love China. I think it's absolutely one of the most fascinating places on the planet. I tell people, both friends and colleagues alike, I said, you should try to get there as soon as you can, because every year there is like a decade of change. 1 year, the next year you go back, you go, holy Christ, what happened here? What happened here? Wonderful people, warm, loving, wonderful people. Great opportunities. Now, it's got its obstacles, just like we do. But the reality is that it's wonderful. So, you know, it's thinking about what you're going to do and how you, whether it's obviously in the United States or elsewhere, you've got to understand culture. So, what's my ending slide here? This is all about, these are all pictures of you. They happen to be in different parts of the world. These are, by the way, the faces of Aon. So I took it out of our leadership meeting that we had in Barcelona last year. And we took a big photo, and then we plastered it right onto there. These are people from Spain. These are people from the Middle East. These are people from Australia. These are people from South Bend, Indiana. These are people from Sao Paulo. These are people from everywhere coming together as a global company, coming together realizing we're in a global economy, coming together to really understand each other and form a great company together. For me, that's what you all represent. When you take your accounting degrees, your finance degrees, your economics degrees, etc., you're going to take them to a world of people. And you're going to have to understand the risk of employing people. You're going to have to understand the risk of the financial sides of companies. You're going to have to understand the risk of everything. But the opportunity is the people. The ability to be part of them, with them, driving them. You've come to a school, by the way, and I saw this so evidence from, by the way, when I showed my wife my agenda for today, I said, that was like a whole year for me as far as the number of meetings. I didn't do that when I was in college here. I only went to 3 classes a day, if that. But I said, you know, I got to see so many people here today. And the reality is that what I feel about you is the same thing I felt back in 1972 when I left. The spirit of this school is alive. The spirit of this school is about good values, good culture, people who come from great families, great background. And now we want to take that, all of you, and take it out to the world. And I think you have an exciting world to go out to. Sure, we have a tough economy. Let's not kid each other. Sure, we're going to have challenges in terms of talking to these college recruiters and getting jobs and whatever. But with all the great things that you possess, with all the things I saw over the last 8 hours here, I can tell you stuff. You're going to walk out of here so well equipped to do business anywhere. But I do hope it's globally. And again, I'd like to thank you for the time, the opportunity to kind of show you my little world, my journey. 40 years later, I'm still staying alive. Thank you.
Quentin, questions?
we have time for a couple of questions.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
For Q&A, there will be a microphone at either aisle, so if you could come up, be able to take a couple questions.
I'd like to ask about tweeting. What is your opinion of higher level managers who tweet? For example, Jack Welch sending tweets, perhaps a little bit too off the cuff and all of that. Do you tweet, and what is your advice to us in terms of Twitter?
I may be that fossil I referred to earlier. I do love my iPad and other little toys that I have. But I've learned probably from the hard way, quite candidly, having encountered Eliot Spitzer and having had to deal with some of the challenges that created. That I think it's great. My children tweet. I don't tweet, and I don't do LinkedIn, okay? And why is it? Because everybody wants LinkedIn, wants a job. So I just, say I don't have that many jobs. But the reality is that they're wonderful tools for communication used appropriately. And if somebody's got all that time to be tweeting, you know that he's retired. Jack's retired. You should be out listening to your clients. You should be out listening to your employees. You should be out listening as opposed to sitting on a machine. And one of the concerns I raised with the dean earlier today, I said, in this modern world of education, I'm concerned, allay my concern that people are still communicating. They're not just doing all this all day long. Because I can tell you one thing, when we look for employees, when we hire employees, we look for this and this, hearts and mind, because we want people who are passionate, we want people who can communicate, we want people who are hardworking, we want people who love what they do, okay? Smart is very important, but not the overall deciding factor, I can assure you. We look at, for instance, we many times will have an opportunity to get somebody from Harvard, right? Well, Harvard's a pretty impressive place, you gotta admit. But that doesn't mean they're gonna be a good employee. Sometimes they have a bad attitude. Sometimes they think they know everything. Sometimes they just can't communicate. So all I say, I know this is more expansive, but what I would say is, it's all dependent upon what you wanna do, but whatever form of communication you take, I think you need to do all of them, not just do the internet. It's a good question, though.
Thank you, sir. My name is Lin, and I come from China. And nice to see you. I have a question regarding to the role of the U.S. plays in the international scenario. When the slides stops on the 1980s and the 1990s, you mentioned that the economic power for U.S. seems like was not as strong as 1970s. But I personally think that is because the United States have evolved from the player of the global market into a ruler of the market. Since a lot of manufacturer stuff has been located outside the U.S., so that gave a chance for like China, like India, to boost their GDP. However, by the same time, the United States seems like generate more impact as a rule maker of the international market. So I personally think GDP is a really confusing indicator. It only measures the size of the economy pie for a certain company, but it fails to measure how the taste of the pie. Yeah. So my question is, what do you think about the role of U.S. will play in the short filter? Will be a stronger rule maker, or return to play like a like a player? Thank you.
You know, I'm not a politician. You could ask that to Paul Ryan or Joe Biden tonight. But I will just comment in regards to what I see as the U.S.'s role. I think it's still a very dominant player in terms of the world markets, certainly in the financial markets. I think it's certainly a military power. That's that's certainly checks and balances what could emerge in terms of political risk. But I don't see it as the power it once was in terms of the global economy. And you're absolutely right. I had to pick something to measure, and I used GDP. GDP is not the end-all, be-all, and really the barometer or benchmark that you want to look at in its totality. I did it because it was the easiest way to measure relative to this speech. But we're now in a global economy. We can't just look at us as the U.S. and say, well, it used to be the phrase, when the U.S. sneezes, the rest of the world has a cold, okay? Well, that's not the case anymore. We're part of the global stage, and we have to be a global partner in that world. And if we've got to learn to do that. We actually find ways to trip and fall over ourselves at times to do that. But the reality is that if we don't do that, our might, if you will, and our power base will fall pretty dramatically. I hope that answers your question. Sure.
Since I was told that for iPhone 5 or 4, and every 4 costs like approximately $500. They are most of them are manufactured in China mainland. However, those subcontractors only earn like $30 to $50 per unit. So I'm wondering, as the labor costs in China has increased sharply recently, and which country or region is the next possible manufacturing center for U.S. or for the entire world? Thank you.
Yeah, well, one of the things that we did as a company was recognize that these things will change in time, and that as there's tremendous pricing inflation in terms of things in China today with the labor costs going up, et cetera. So we kind of hedged our bets. We have places in the Philippines, we have call centers and other centers in India, obviously. We have them in China. We also have them in places like Latin America. So, we have to be prepared to move them, and I think this is true of manufacturing firms as well. They have to be able to move them in terms of their needs from a cost perspective. So my recommendation for most companies is you've got to hedge your bet, because you can wake up one day and have the most expensive cost base to operate and therefore become uncompetitive. Thank you.
I'm a faculty member in entrepreneurship, and I tell my students that in order to find out where the opportunity is, you have to talk to the customer. If you were going to do a startup today in the industry and you had to pick where that was, where the pain was or where the opportunity was for someone out here who might be aspiring to that, what would it be?
Are you talking about a location?
Yep. I was talking about industry area,
industry
but
or whatever. I say plastics. No, that was Dustin Hoffman. That's a really, really good question, because I think that there's a lot of different areas that I think have tremendous opportunity, including what we see in new startups in the internet world, et cetera. And I do think that there's opportunities in growing and emerging economies that present some pretty interesting things in terms of whether it's our industry or what have you. If you look at the area that I'm most familiar with is the financial services business. And to me, that there are so many areas out there that are emerging in terms of being able to provide what I call enterprise risk solutions. I think that's a very exciting area where you can go in and help people understand what their risk of entering into different territories, et cetera. I don't have any one specific area that I can really point to, but they're there. Trust me, they're there. And I happened, I didn't mention it in my career, but I started 2 companies myself that I sold. The first company I sold was when I was 29 years old. So my dad once said to me a very important thing: never ask a millionaire how old he is, because age is not a restriction. We saw Bill Gates. We've seen the people who've started, all these startup companies. We've seen everything. Never let any boss or any place where you go to say, you know what, give me another 10 years and I'll make you a vice president. Forget that. That's the first sign you should probably be walking down the street. But the reality is the world of entrepreneurship is still very much flourishing, and the opportunities are. We've seen things in our own industry which you'd say, insurance industry is a pretty mature industry, but right here in the United States, where people have started up firms and done incredibly well, just doing it better, listening to the clients, coming up with different ideas, different approaches.
When you were talking about the next place to go for like manufacturing, as the prior question was, you didn't talk about Africa at all. Is there ever going to be faith in that continent? And when do you think that will be?
We have, Africa that was a great question because we talked about this earlier today too. I've been to Africa probably 10 different times over the last probably 10 years. And some for pleasure and some for business. And I can tell you, it's a very exciting world, we do approximately $200 million of revenue there right now. That's double what it was 5 years ago, okay? Tremendously rich in natural resources, a lot of political uncertainty, a lot of political risk, but, and you've got to watch the corruption, et cetera, and all the things that go with it. But the reality is that this is an economy that over the next 10 to 20 years is going to blossom and build and grow. And it just, the political will overcome a lot of the issues that are there. They've got to get their arms around governance. They've got to get their arms around, organizational issues. But just to give you an idea, our $200 million business there, or we're just an insurance broker over there, we do that at about a 40% margin. Not a bad business. So, that's what happens when you get into some of these emerging economies. You can get a pretty high margin relative to what you're doing because you don't have as many people competing in the same space because they're not willing to take the risk of being there. We're in 10 countries in Africa. So it's one that you definitely want to watch and certainly be part of. It's a good question.
All right. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Mike.
Go Warhawks.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Really appreciate it. And thank you all for coming today for our inaugural Leadership Ways and Wisdom lecture series. I think you see we try very hard to offer you tremendous educational opportunities in the classroom and in other ways. But at the end of the day, a lot of it really is about the people, as Mike said, and having somebody who is so incredibly busy, going from Ireland to Greece to Spain, or maybe it was the other way around, take time out of their schedule to come back and talk to us about what it's really like to operate at that level, and the fact that you can come from UW Whitewater and end up with your corporate headquarters in London, your home in Chicago, and your business all over the world is a wonderful example to us. We're very appreciative of your time. Thank you so much.
Thank you.